Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Glenn Gould Studio. I'm Teresa Scandifio, the Senior Director of Learning at TIFF's year-round TIFF Lightbox programming, and the programmer for the In Conversation with series during the festival. It is my huge honor to welcome you to tonight's In Conversation with Mahershala Ali. It warms my heart to see such a full crowd for what we know is going to be a really special evening. So thank you for supporting us and for joining us tonight. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. Tonight is the first event of this year's In Conversation with series at the festival. Tomorrow night, our guest will be the two-time Academy Award winner Hilary Swank, and Wednesday night, Academy Award nominated and Golden Globe winner Maggie Gyllenhaal will join us for an onstage conversation. For more information, join us at tiff.net. Tonight's event is presented by the Directors Guild of Canada. At this time, I'd like to introduce Bill Skolnick, Executive Director and CEO of DGC Ontario, to say a few words on behalf of the Directors Guild of Canada. So please join us in welcoming Bill.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, for those of you who are celebrating Shana Tova, I hope we have some folks here who will enjoy this and have a sweet new year. I'm always struck by the Glenn Gould studio and having events here for TIFF because Glenn Gould was one of our true international artists, and he was a visionary, and he believed very strongly that live performance was going to be transcended by electronic recording of the arts, and that's what TIFF does. TIFF celebrates the audio-visual depiction of art. Well, there's another connection to the Glenn Gould studio, and that's that this movie, The Green Book, with Mahershala Ali, celebrates Don Shirley, who's a major character in the film. And the book is based to a great extent on him. And he was a virtuoso pianist, like Glenn Gould. But he was a very rare musical animal because he was a classical player who could swing. And like Andre Previn, Claude Bolling, Wynton Marsalis. And in fact, I think it's going to be in the film, but I urge all of you to hear his performance, his rendition of Waterboy, if you want to really know what type of player he was. Like Don Shirley, Mahershala Ali has a special gift. He has a rare ability. He takes you into a story, and you forget that you've ever seen him in any other work as any other character. This, to me, is the highest accolade you can give an actor. He has a duality in his performance as well. He sweeps the audience into empathy for his character, and at the same time, he displays an uncanny ability to empathize with the characters surround him. So, it gives me great pleasure to ask Teresa to come back and to bring on our two guests.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. So we're in for a treat. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Amanda Paris. By day, Amanda writes a weekly column for CBC Arts, hosts 3 CBC television series, CBC Arts Exhibitionist, The Filmmakers, and From the Vaults, and is the radio host of Marvin's Room on CBC Music. By night, she writes stories for the stage and screen. Over the course of her career, Amanda has worked as an educator, a researcher, an actor, and a community organizer. She is a playwright and the co-founder of the award-winning alternative education organization Lost Lyrics. Please give it up for Amanda Paris.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here tonight. Who else is excited? Yeah. Okay, cool. Without further ado, let me introduce the guest of the hour. Mahershala Ali starred in Barry Jenkins' Academy Award Best Picture Drama, Moonlight, for which he received the 2017 Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Deserves an applause. He also starred in the highly acclaimed feature Hidden Figures, directed by Ted Melfi, but is perhaps best known for playing Remy Denton on the award-winning Netflix series House of Cards, for which he received a 2016 Emmy nomination. Prior to his recent critical success, he also starred in Gary Ross's The Free State of Jones, opposite Matthew McConaughey, the final installments of the Hunger Games franchise, playing Boggs in Mockingjay Part 1 and Part 2, and the Marvel Netflix series Luke Cage as Cottonmouth. His other film credits include Derek Cianfrance's The Place Beyond the Pines, opposite Ryan Gosling and Bradley Cooper, and David Fincher's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Tonight, we are so thrilled to welcome Mahershala Ali to the stage for a conversation about his career, the third season of HBO's critically acclaimed True Detective series, and Green Book, his film playing in the gala section of the festival, which you need to go and see. Please join me in welcoming Mahershala Ali. So thank you so much for joining us here in Toronto. We apologize for the weather.
No, it's all right. I'm glad some people came out. Thought Ryan Gosling was coming or something.
So I want to start off by reading something to you, and you tell me what comes to your mind when I read it. I apologize in advance because I might get some words wrong.
Okay.
All right. Realizations. I know you've been waiting, craving. Patience is the key to blessings, lessons. General information, I sketch where the West was won. I'm feeling fresh under this Vancouver sun. Galactic traveler, rays of, and I wasn't sure what the word was there. Hitchhike to paradise, kingdom come.
Wow, wow. I wrote that in Vancouver.
This is a song.
Yeah. Wow, that's like 12 years old. Oh, man. How much digging did you do? Oh, wow. Wow, that's good.
So you had a life as a rapper.
I did. I actually, so right out of undergrad, I got a job at The Gavin. It was a music industry magazine. I recorded spins, so I would call a radio station and I would say, how many times did you play Erykah Badu's On and On? And they would say 73 times this week. And so I was doing that, and I had been recording music for years. And that's where I got this indie deal while I was working at this magazine. And the night of my second show, we just got my single pressed up.
You had the CDs ready to go?
Yeah, well, we pressed up vinyl back then. It was like a hip-hop thing, you know? So I literally had my audition for NYU for the grad program the next day, and I think it was like February 15th or something. And so I just got this deal. We just printed up this single, and the next day I auditioned for grad school, and I ended up getting in. So I had to call the label guy and said, look, I'm going to school, man, for this acting thing. So yeah, so I put it down for a long time.
Okay, okay. So we're going to go back to it, but let's go a little further back.
Yeah.
So when you were younger, you wrote poetry and you wrote monologues. Was this something at that time, as a teenager writing, was this something that you would share with the world, or was this something that you kept intimately for yourself?
It was something that I shared with people that I trusted and I felt like would sort of get it, like understand. You know, it wasn't something I shared with a lot of people. My father was ill, and it's something that I did to sort of cope with that. I had insomnia really bad leaving high school, and I would just be up all night into the next day, and so I started writing a lot, and I wrote this little book and put it together. I had it print. I went to Kinko's, and I made a cover and all this stuff, and I started performing my poetry. And so my dad was a musical theater actor, and he did Dreamgirls and Five Guys Named Mo, all these shows, like back in the 80s. And so we were never like connected in terms of like the arts per se, but I respected what he saw. And the films that he exposed and shared with me, I had so much respect for his taste and his talent. But we never felt totally connected because I was really an athlete. I went to school on a basketball scholarship. So it wasn't until that wasn't going particularly well, my time as an athlete in school, and I had this collection of poetry, and I would go and visit him, and I would sort of perform it for him, not knowing I was doing like monologues. And he was so into it and dug it, and his friends would be over, and I would do it for them. And you know, kids are always looking for the like positive feedback, like where do you get your cues so that you know what direction to go in. And I was like, I think compared to my friends, this is not at all a compliment to myself, but I was hyper conscious about the future and trying to find what it was that I was supposed to be doing, because I had like a gut feeling that I was supposed to be doing something.
Where did that come from?
Probably from him, and to some degree, my dad won Soul Train in 1977. So they used to have like a national dance contest, and so he was on. I remember it was one of my early memories of seeing him on TV in his apartment in San Francisco, and I remember looking up, and he was dancing on TV. So it was just. I remember he won this car, and I remember he won $2,500. And I found his letter from Johnson & Johnson recently about the prize or whatever. I found it like 4 years ago. But so because he ended up leaving when I was 3 and moving to New York, and I knew he was like in Amsterdam and Japan and like sending me postcards, and I wish there was FaceTime back then. It would have been extraordinary. But because he pursued his dream, he passed really young. I'm 6 years older than my dad when he passed. But he passed really young that I felt this pressure associated with time and sort of becoming and like living your life to the fullest. And so where I grew up in Hayward, California, borders Oakland essentially. Hey, Hayward in the building. The thing about growing up in the Bay Area, it's a dangerous place in a sense, because there's enough, and I don't mean that physically, I don't mean walking down the street and someone's gonna shoot you, but I mean there's enough there where I think it takes an extra degree of courage to do something to get yourself out. Even if you come back to go have other experiences somewhere, I think there's enough there to keep you there. And I knew, because I had spent time in New York and I had traveled with him. In '86, I came to Canada. He was doing Dreamgirls here. And I had all these experiences, like sort of traveling with him in these bits when I would see him in the summer, that I felt not always healthy, but I felt a healthy pressure to figure it out before like I was stuck. It'd be different if I came back. I love the Bay Area. That will always be home. But I knew I had to get out to see what it was that that needed to come out.
Yeah.
You know.
Can you talk a little bit more about those summers that you spent with your father and the things that he exposed you to and what that inspired in you creatively?
Well, he exposed me to. I remember some of my early independent films that I saw were like The Player and Shortcuts. Oh gosh, I saw One False Move, Billy Bob Thornton. It's like first film. I just remember being exposed to like seeing Spike Lee movies in the late '80s, early '90s in the theater, going to see George Wolfe plays. Like I'm from Hayward, you know, so you're going to New York and you're going to Broadway and you're going backstage and you're seeing like Jeffrey Wright on stage, like for your first play, you know, do Angels in America and Savion Glover, and I'm meeting these people. So he was constantly exposing me. He was taking me to museums every time I traveled to see him. And one of my favorite stories about my dad, it was '93, a year before he passed, and So I'm in my sophomore year of college. And he goes, I'm not really getting you any school clothes this year. And I was like, well, yeah, okay. And I was excited because, you know, my dad had the best taste. He was like fly. And I was, you know, so he was always going to take me to get, you know, a nice handful of like school clothes
You
and
come
go
back with
back.
those New York clothes.
Yeah, you never seen this, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, this is like, you know, my dad got me this. And he goes, you know, I'm not going to get you a bunch of school clothes this year. And he goes, but I'm going to get you one thing. And I was like, huh, okay. And he goes, I'm going to take you to Barney's. I'm like, I don't know anything about Barney's. So he goes, I'm going to let you pick out one thing. And I was like, okay. So he takes me to Barney's, and I pick out this, like, beautiful sweater. It was kind of oversized. And later on, I got it. He was almost giving me this lesson in quality over quantity, and that I have that sweater to this day. And that was 1993. And believe me, I take care of that thing. But that's essentially who he was in my life. I didn't get enough time with him. I should say I didn't have a lot of time with him, but I got enough time with him. And most of the times, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who will say, a parent did more for me by leaving than staying. But I truly believe that I got so much more out of my father leaving home when I was 3 years old. And the lessons I learned from him and his pursuit of a fulfillment that he couldn't necessarily find at home. It felt like he had a calling, being around him, being around his friends, and it felt like he was called to something that we still had a relationship, and he was still go to New York, and I'm put my hands on the rails going down to the subway, and I hear him telling me to take my hand off the rail, or don't bite your fingernails, like all these, he gave me, I was 13, and he got this jacket, gave me this like kind of suede jacket. It was beautiful. And I remember thinking to put my hand in the pocket. And I put my hand in the pocket. I kid you not, it was like a directive. Like I put the jacket on. I remember I thought, check the pocket. And I checked the pocket. No conversation, nothing said after that. But I put my hand in the pocket, and there was a condom. And he kind of looked at me, and I was at that age, and I was like, oh, my dad's cool, all right. Got it.
That's
Got
amazing.
it. Lesson, you know, that was the birds and the bees talk. So there you go.
Okay, so let's talk about your journey as an artist. I read that your love of acting began in the theater specifically.
Yeah.
And the theater is this very magical place where, you know, belief is suspended, the audience comes in, and if you tell them this table is now a car, it's a car.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what the theater provided to you as a young person exploring this creative outlet for the first time?
Love of characters. And a real appreciation for great writing. So in school, I went to grad at NYU, and it was an extraordinary program. Everybody was better than me. And I was an athlete making a transition into acting. And the interesting thing about that was when I was in undergrad, I was sort of a kid with an artist's heart, but that was on the basketball team. So I was always kind of this hybrid or whatever. But what I found just being around those extraordinary professors and teachers and really talented people was this emphasis on transformation being the bar, being like the barometer. And the effort was always for me. So I never got to play anybody black in grad school. One time at the end of my third year, I got to play, I did a Pearl Cleage play called Blues for an Alabama Sky. And I can't tell you how liberating that was in a certain way, to just to have experience a writing that I didn't have to do this extra set of transforming so that the audience is at ease and believes me, you know? And so, because that's the thing with these conservatory programs, that they're usually not getting to, there's not enough 18 students, 3 or 4 might be of color, you know?
If you're lucky.
Yeah, you know, and so, and it's what it is. You're doing Shakespeare and Sam Shepard and, I don't know, Eugene Miller or Arthur Miller and Eugene O'Neill, all these people, you know. And it's all about transformation, you know. And so for me, I think because these characters weren't like me, they weren't of my world, that there was this effort to sort of be malleable for that story. And so I've taken that with me. There's been times when I've had a little bit more time to do that work, to build a character, but I really came up in television. So I found that I had to make decisions really quickly, character choices very quickly. And I think my time in school and my time in the theater really served me.
So let's talk about that. As soon as you graduated from school, you automatically, like immediately, went into television and film, this career. What was that transition like for you?
It was a place where I think my meticulous nature could kind of find a home. And what I mean by that is that when you do the same thing 12 times in one setup, and they move the camera and you might do it 5 one way and then 3 at another, I've always enjoyed building in that time and coming up with sort of curating the physicality of a performance. When I'm putting down a glass, when I'm touching my tie. It's almost like doing 2 forms of work at once. So the physical work, but also whatever emotional, energetic journey that I'm on as well. And so I think because I think some people get bored by how many times you have to, how many setups there are, how many times you have to shoot in one setup to do a scene. That is something for me that I always found, like I love working with David Fincher.
Does he do a lot of that?
You know, he just does a lot of takes. And then like within that time, I'm just having a blast because I'm just trying to like improve on the shot. And so after I understood, I think I fairly quickly understood the medium, because in theater, they would always have to push me to be larger, to get to the back of the room. And I'm in some ways, I'm a little more contained. I like subtlety. Like what I do pride myself on in my work is how to do something. I'm always trying to do less. And because the camera picks it up. And so what I found in film and television that I love is this space for me to do less. And in my own ways, I will not legitimately, not literally fight, but I will kind of fight a director when they want me to be bigger, because I can tell my own barometer will go off and I'll know that that's too much or that it's unnecessary. And I would rather tell the story in a way that is more subtle, because I believe the audience is more intelligent than what we give them credit for. And they pick up on those things, so we don't have to always like beat them over the head with the writing or with gesture or emotional work per se, that there's more space for subtlety there. And that's my own dialect. At least if I look at my work, that what the hiccups that I see is when I could have been more subtle, you know.
Interesting. You've talked a lot about, or not a lot, but I've seen in a few interviews about the fact that a lot of your early roles felt like you were the diversity hire. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to work with that realization?
I think I was angry for a long time, you know, and I try not to be, but I think I was really frustrated for many years, just because I think we all, whatever it is that you do, whatever your passion is, like, I'm very passionate about my work, and I'm very much a perfectionist. So I personally have to let it go. You know, I have to be okay with it, you know. And I think sort of navigating this industry and my time in it, I'm sincerely grateful for every experience I've had, from my first job where I was fired eventually after 19 episodes, in part because I was like, why am I not being written for? But my name is fourth, you know, but I have 2 lines in this episode or what have you. And honestly, I'm my toughest critic. I know I wasn't doing bad work. It wasn't a fit for them, and I felt like I was the black guy on the show. And what I appreciate and respect about that time, and I think I'll try to get back to making a real point, but what I appreciate about that time is the last few years have been a lot of diversity conversations. And I'm really happy to see what the Tessa Thompsons and the Michael B. Jordans and what Trevante Rhodes is getting to do, and Donald Glover, and this like 2012 on 2014 generation is stepping into. I wasn't that generation, you know. I started working professionally in 2000, and that was the NAACP era of getting these policies passed or putting pressure on networks to hire not just actors, but people of color in the writer's room and directors. And so actors are really getting cast because they have to, right, in that period. And what's important about that is eventually you see enough people, they're present enough where I think it's created an opening for people to take it further, keep the pressure on, where people can begin to be seen as equals in terms of their talent, or people who were equally deserving. And we're not there yet, but there's been progress. I've seen it and have experienced it. But so during that time, and even up till, you know, more recently, it'd been really frustrating because, you know, you feel like you're as a talent, as a creative, you feel like you're holding in a sneeze for decades. And here it is, 44, and I've been working, always have been a principal on essentially, basically every show I've been on.
A principal meaning?
Principal, you know, cast member. You know, I was never like and God bless anyone who is, but I was never like a day player, or if I was guest starring, it was 9 times out of 10 the featured guest star or whatever. So I was always present, but here it is, I had to win an Oscar to get a leading part, you know, and I had never had that opportunity before until after that, which is True Detective is my first actual lead, you know. So that's been my experience. And then in hindsight, people go, oh, he's good, you know, but.
I thought he was good that time.
Yeah, you know.
So, I mean, you mentioned a lot of the Black creatives today that are doing incredible things, but they're also, a lot of them are creating their own work. Was that something you ever thought about doing, is creating the roles that you wanted to be in?
Yeah, I did think about it, but even in that, that wasn't a time where you're necessarily going to be supported. You know,
Yeah.
again, we maybe the last 5 years, there are more avenues, legitimate ways in which your project can be. I'm not saying that it was impossible then, but it wasn't. It really wasn't to me a viable option. You know, it was about trying to move up and get cast in the next thing and use this to get that and that to get. So I was always very conscious of sort of scaling the wall. You know, for example, my big break was actually a movie that I was in for 2 scenes, and that was in 2015. I shot it. And that movie is Kicks. Very small film directed by a gentleman by the name of Justin Tipping. And the reason I say that that was my big break is because that film that ended up coming out, I think a month before Moonlight came out, was how I got Moonlight. And so I had been working up to that point for 15 years. And I was often, you know, playing these guys who were like House of Cards, sort of the business world. He was obviously a lobbyist, a police officer type, FBI agent-y kind of thing. And I had done some character work, like I was in Fincher's Benjamin Button. And that's where more of my heart is just wanting to do that kind of work, like transformational stuff. But it was all kind of, none of it, I didn't get to exhaust it at all. And so I did this film, and I was really surprised to get an offer on this film because it was a character that I had never had an opportunity to play. It was somebody, or of a world that I never had the opportunity to be in. And so here's this guy who's from Oakland. He had been in prison, you know, years earlier, and sort of just a brother from the hood. And that had never been my experience. And so I was really excited to do these 2 scenes, and they were pretty fleshed out. And I did it. I didn't really think a lot of it. I thought the film was good. I felt like the film had potential. And when they were casting Moonlight, they went to another gentleman first. And for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And one of the producers approached Barry about me. And at the time, Barry Jenkins, director of Moonlight, and Barry said, well, you know, he's kind of square, though. You know, like, and he didn't mean it as a diss. Like, he just meant, like, everything he's seen me do was very much like in a suit, you know, arresting somebody, or you know. And it was, so Adela Romansky, the one of the producers, executive producer of Moonlight, and who had produced on Kicks, the film is barely cut and edited. She showed him my scenes from Kicks, and that's how I got the offer on Moonlight, was because of that. And so that was the opening for me. And so I've always been extraordinarily conscious and in whatever little power I had, because I've said no my entire career from back to 2000. If it didn't feel right, I don't care how broke I was. My grandparents cared, but but it didn't matter how broke I was. If that part didn't speak to me in some way, if there wasn't something I could do with it, I would say no. And so I was always really conscious of the build, and it felt like as I was scaling the wall, there were years in which I felt like I was slipping down and trying to come back up, but always trying to get to a place of sort of empowerment where I can make more conscious, deliberate choices about the things that I was doing, and have more control on my own development and evolution and advancement, as an actor.
So we've been talking a lot. I think it's time for us to take a look at one of the scenes from one of your earlier films, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Oh, boy.
I read that unlike a lot of other actors, you're okay with rewatching the films that you've been in.
I haven't seen that in 10 years.
Yeah, how did that
That's
feel watching
wild.
that?
Strange. Like totally strange. You know, I I don't know how to get better unless I watch it. And so even that I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. But you know, it's all a process. Like you don't get to when it's time when I'm not interested in that, I really will be doing something else. Like I will retire or whatever. Like I'm I, I watching dailies or watching Green Book. I see, oh, okay, that's what stands out to me. Like I'm glad if people are I'm so happy if people are responding to the work and it's resonating, but that's really not my job to enjoy it. Like, I don't really look at it like that. It's really my job to go, oh, okay, well, that's cool. You were able to accomplish this, that, and the other. But as someone who is hired to push a story along, to be a key participant in storytelling, how do I do that better? You know, and that for me, that's part of the joy is when I go home at night feeling like, oh, that was better. Or if I'm having a rough day or if I'm not, the scene requires something emotionally and I'm just tapped for whatever reason. How do I technique my way through this scenario so that I'm not getting in the way of the story being told in a way that can really impact the audience in the manner in which we are setting out to do.
What can you lean back on in your craft?
Yeah.
So you booked The Curious Case of Benjamin Button while you were shooting the death scene of your character in 4400.
Yeah.
What was it like making that transition from series regular to Hollywood film? Or not even what was it like, but what did it mean to you to make that transition?
It really, you know, that's my first film working with David Fincher, you know, and
It's a good first film.
yeah, and it was just having a peek into the door. And film was in a different place in that time compared to now. I mean, I should say television was in a very different place. And it was extraordinarily difficult to go from crossing Jordan on NBC to like David Fincher. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't happening like that. You know,
It was all CSI and Law
no,
and Order and
it was if you did theater, you were kind of in theater, and you try to. I got on Law and Order, and then you go back and do a play, you know. And if you were on TV back then, it was like, man, I'm trying to get a pilot, man. Like, all right, I see you for pilot season. I'll meet you in LA, and everyone's just trying to book a pilot on whatever network, and so the film was like once you were in TV, like Anthony Mackie and I came out of school. He went to Juilliard. He came out of school like a couple of years after me, like maybe a year or two. And Anthony like hopped right into feature film, like immediately. He was like the lead in a Spike Lee movie, and he stayed there, like never left film. You know, I don't know, he might have a TV show under his belt, but essentially he's just been in film. And that time coming out of school in 2000, once you were on TV, you were like, all right, I paid my grad school debts, you know, but you were gonna be on TV. So it was a huge deal for me to book that part, which was because I was on a show shooting it in Canada called The 4400, which shot in Vancouver, and there were qualities in that character that David Fincher had liked, and that's really what sort of opened the door for me to book that part.
Okay. That was when you were writing those rhymes.
Under
that Vancouver sun.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Speaking of which, as a musician, what role does music play in the preparation of your characters?
Oh, music is huge for me. I play so much music in the trailers, in the makeup trailer, like, and it's all character specific music. So I was just shooting True Detective, and the little bit I can tell you is that it takes place in over several decades. And so if we were shooting in 1980 that day, I don't listen to anything beyond 1980, you know? And if it's 1990, I have a character playlist or music that I'm open to that will lead up until 90. And if it's beyond that, it's the same thing. And it's all because we are frequencies.
Yeah.
And music changes your frequency. So it's, for me, part of the foundation of my character work is tapping into either the music that my character responds to or music of the world and of the time that my character would be aware of or sort of cross paths in some ways with or hear, or if it's something that is, so if I'm shooting something that was 1919 and you know, it's hard to get, there's like these slave shouts and some old folk music, but it's really hard to date and whatnot. Then I'm finding things that essentially capture the essence of that character in that time. But music plays has a big part in my it plays a big part in my process.
I'm just putting it out there, but I would love to hear the playlist for your characters. So as a marketing tool, I feel like you should release the playlist after the project comes out.
I've thought of it several times.
I think, you know, I would subscribe to that playlist on iTunes or something, you know? Or
I'm
on
not
Tidal.
that hip, but I will at you when I do that.
All right, so I think we're going to see another 2 clips this time. Clip from The Place Beyond the Pines and a clip from House of Cards.
This is coffee's fucking house.
So For many people, Remy Danton was the breakout role that kind of made you a household name. What do you think it was about Remy that captivated people or that caught people's attention?
We've never seen that character. In 2013, when it premiered, a black lobbyist, somebody who was cold and calculated, but at some point he also had a conscience. He was really intelligent, stood up to the president, and really had a real vision for what he was doing and trying to accomplish. Like he was actively pursuing something and very aggressive about it. He's not a passive character. And I think sometimes when you put a different person or a different being in that circumstance, that environment, a black man in that I think was relatively unique and we hadn't up until that point had a lot of shows that had a real focus on the inner workings of politics or the presidency or the White House, and this show was some sort of glimpse into that in a way that even when we went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner in like 2014, felt like the Beatles going up in there. Like they were so excited to see us, and time and again they kept saying like, wow, man, I'm a lobbyist. I'm so blown away by what you're doing. It's like seeing myself up there. And I was like, oh my God,
terrible.
That's scary.
Yeah, that's
horrible.
I'm just thinking of my mom was like, I don't like him, but I like how he wears a suit. That's what she would always say whenever you came on the screen. Which is a whole other conversation. How did you know you were ready to move on from House of Cards?
I wasn't growing. And I didn't want to be just another actor on a series that was just on. I had friends that were telling me like, man, you tripping. You want to get off that show. And I just knew it wasn't going anywhere for me. And I didn't want to be, I approached them about it and I said, hey, look, I think this is a great time to write me out the show. Because you're at a place where every season they're sort of transitioning and finding what the story and what the arc is going to be for the year. And I didn't feel like where the show was at and where I was at personally, I didn't feel like that they were necessarily in alignment. And I wasn't going to necessarily ask them to write more for me. I'm really not that kind of person. I kind of feel like if you want to do it, you will do it. And I can receive it much better than if I'm saying, hey, write more for me, I was kind of like, well, look, I don't feel like you necessarily need me. So let me go pursue other opportunities. And, it took a little while, took a year, but then I was able to get off the show. And I really appreciate what they did and how much respect they showed toward my desire to move on and to go, because I just didn't feel like I was being challenged, And so that last season, I went from being a series regular to a guest star, and I had to do like at least 4 episodes. I ended up doing maybe 6, but because I had been making that request for over a year, I was able to work on, in that last season of House of Cards, at the same time I was shooting House of Cards, Luke Cage, Moonlight, and one other project.
Was that not Kicks?
Kicks.
Yeah.
Maybe Kicks and then Future Relic. I was shooting 5, literally, for about a month. It was kind of every day I was either working or traveling to go do a different job. the playlist came in really handy.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
It really did, because
Okay,
I'm like, all right, I'm in Miami now. Okay, that's what
I'm
I'm
going to
doing.
pause you there because
Yes.
I think this is a great time to look at 2 clips from Moonlight and Hidden Figures. No one can quite like Taraji.
Yes, yes.
When you were making Hidden Figures, did you have any idea how big an impact it would have?
No. Well, I felt like it was gonna be good. You don't know when you read. I didn't know what it was going to be. And what I mean by that is, if Ted Melfi he'd done like one other film, and it was that I knew of, and it was really different from this. And so so as actors, and you're going like, well, who's producing it? Like, well, what tint is this film gonna have on it? You know, when you don't have a lot of information for a director that has a track record, you know. So on the page, it read and looked one way, and then when I saw the film, I was like, oh, okay, this is what we made, you know? And that happens a lot. Sometimes you're responding to the larger story and the character and the opportunity to work with this actor or that actor. And really, in part, I really loved the story, and I loved how it shined the spotlight on these 3 women. And honestly, at that time, I was really tired, and I had just done those 4 or 5 projects, and I did a play. So I was moving to LA at that time, but I thought, you know, this is a good project to kind of stop what I'm doing and go shoot and work on this for like 3 weeks in Atlanta, and sort of lend my support to that larger narrative of the story that was featuring like 3 extraordinary Black women, and what they accomplished and what they did was exceptional. And so I just really, my participation in that film was really first and foremost from that place. The fact that it came out and it was so well received the way it was sort of icing on the cake for me.
Yeah. I want to talk about Moonlight. I've watched probably too many interviews with you talking about it. in a good
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
not just for research, but prior to. And I am struck by the way that you describe your relationship to Juan. Almost feels like a true relationship. Like there was, this falling in love with the character, immersing yourself, being completely consumed in some on the days that you were shooting, and maybe even beyond. And then the sort of mourning when the time came to leave Juan behind as well too. Can you talk a little bit about how your craft helps to foster that sort of deep connection to the character, and why Juan specifically was able to bring that out in you?
I did something with Juan that I hadn't done up until that point. I remember being in a hotel in Miami, and I was really nervous. And we were about to start shooting like the next day. And I hadn't ever like prayed for a character before. So I found myself in an effort to be more, because I look, regardless if you're atheist or whatever, Christian, Buddhist, what have you, I just believe we're all spirits at the end of the day. And so what I wanted to do, and it wasn't like a technique thing, but just out of my love for these characters and and for the work, it was the first time that I actually prayed for a character like he was a real person. And then later on I found out he was a real person actually, which was shared later. Yeah, and Terrell Alvin McCraney told me sort of the real story later. But so I found myself like praying for him, and I was having conversations with him, just in a certain way, wanting to know what he wanted me to share and what he wanted me to know. And I just approached it like that. I'm always making up stuff, but I really approached it like that, and that was the deepest connection that up until that point that I'd ever had with a character, because I think I tried to walk into it respecting him as a spirit first, and build everything on that. And so I felt like at the very least I was trying to communicate an energy, and one that was loving and supportive, and the circumstances are just what they are, growing up in the projects and finding yourself in a situation where selling drugs seems like the thing that makes the most sense, and what is readily available, and a way and a means for yourself. And all in all, he was like a middle class drug dealer. If you think about where he lived, and in some ways he was very discreet and was trying to have a life in some capacity that he could sustain for as long as possible. And so I was trying to relate to him first and foremost from a spiritual place.
So after I saw Moonlight, I went on like this crazy rabbit hole deep dive trying to read everything that everybody was writing about it, because I just wanted to stay in the world longer. And I realized that very few things that were being written by Black men. And so I'm lucky enough to have a platform where I write a weekly column, and I opened it up to 8 Black men to share their thoughts on what Moonlight was. And I want to read what one of those men wrote. His name is David Lewis Pert, and I'm reading this with his permission. What most surprised me during the film was just how uncomfortable and unaccustomed I was to observing an elder Black man and a young Black boy interact in the absence of any kind of violence, manipulation, or intimidation. I found myself cautiously watching as their relationship unfolded and examining it for any signs of the inappropriate. Distrustful, I waited for a shoe to drop. But that, in fact, was what the story really pushed. Juan said to the little Chiron, "Whatever happens, I got you." Can I trust this man? I was genuinely moved when I realized Chiron and I both could trust him. When you get to work on something like this, a role that fundamentally challenges even the people who look like the character you're representing and might connect even more than most, does it create a new standard in the types of roles that you look for yourself?
First, I'm just grateful. And I think it definitely has contributed, for sure. It was working on Barry's film was like getting to do a scene August Wilson in like a scene study class for the first time in school, or the Pearl Cleage play, for instance. There was something about being at home and feeling like, even though no one is, obviously people in the film longer than others, but it was sort of a short experience for all of us. Like Naomi Harris shot that in 3 days. You know, all her work was done in 3 days.
She's crazy.
Mine was in like 6 or something, and it really shouldn't have been that, but she was having trouble getting into the States, so we had to like push mine back. So my point is, really just having writing that felt, however short-lived the character was, that they felt like full moments. And so if anything, you get informed on what it is finally to feel like a fleshed out human being on screen with just opportunity to just kind of sit there and drive, or to look at someone, and use that as dialogue. You know, like, I'm not accustomed to having that kind of time. I'm not accustomed to the camera being on me, and you having time to necessarily process the thoughts and the math that one does in making a decision, you know? So I think, if anything, I have, moving on from that, I think I just feel a greater commitment to finding stories and characters where they just feel there's an opportunity to play a full-fledged human being.
So let's go to that other job that you were working at the time, Luke Cage.
No. Where's my...
I love Cottonmouth.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great role. I was waiting for the moment where he came back from the dead, but it's cool. It's all good. But I read that you were interested in doing something with Marvel for a minute before it was Cottonmouth. What kind of role were you thinking about? And if there was a particular character?
Well, I was just interested in the world to some degree, and I had met with them on different things, and you know, they're meeting other people too, obviously, you know, and so that was the one. When that came back around, as I was on that last season of House of Cards, and the first thing, same casting director, Ray Mayfield, that cast House of Cards, is Luke Cage, and she says, "All right, first, Mahershala, he's gonna die, all right? It's only 6 episodes," because I was like, I'm not signing up for another TV show right now. I was like, nope, I'm free, got my freedom. I'm gonna like pursue it. Like, I'm gonna find something, you know?
Yeah.
And she was like, well, he's gonna die like episode 6 or 7. I was like, sounds good. What else? And what that did was that really freed me up. Why I loved working on that was I just knew I could just go for it until I got thrown out the window. And
Yep.
so yeah, but I hadn't at that time I hadn't had I had like a conversation about one of their shows earlier on, but that was the first time it became real, and I just wanted to be in the world and be in that comic book world for a moment, and did it and had a good time.
It looked like you had a good time.
Yeah, had a good time.
I want to make sure we have time for all your questions, so I'm going to jump to the next clip, which is us getting to see a little bit of True Detective.
Oh, okay.
Let's see that one. You're now a leading man. How does that feel?
Feels good. I found, going back to my dad real quick, I was in, so I moved out of New York in 2000. And I hadn't really been back. I hadn't been back to Brooklyn until like right before I got married. So I'm talking like 13 years. I've been in New York, but it was like in and out. And I don't know, it might be like Toronto, but New York, you can't just like go to New York and empty your storage locker. Like, you got to figure out how you're gonna like dispose of all the stuff, or where you're gonna put it. Like, I live in LA, or I was living on the West Coast, so it wasn't like an easy thing to do. So finally, when my wife and I knew each other from grad school, and many years later, we reconnected. Like 12 years later, we reconnected. So we get married, and we're in New York, and she goes, "What's up with your storage? When did you clear that out?" I said, "Oh, no, I haven't cleared that out." She's like, "What do you mean you haven't cleared it out?" So I hadn't cleared out my storage, and I'm going through it, and I'm the type where I have to go through every single paper, like
you're meticulous.
everything. Every paper. She's like, "Just throw it away, just throw it away," and I'm like going through everything, every picture, and I find this card, and it's a postcard. It's of my father. So back in like the 80s, 90s, they started, I remember when it happened, because he got these new headshots, and then he got this postcard. And this was like the beginning of like the gym era. And he looked amazing. He was fit and cut and all this, muscles on muscles. And he had this picture where his shirt was off, and he had his hands like this, and you could see the bottom of his chin, and he was standing up. He had these beautiful pants on. And it was like this extraordinary postcard. And I somehow had that, but it was my grandmother's copy of it. And I lived with my grandparents in high school and in the summers throughout undergrad. And so when I moved to NYU, I must have taken that and some other things. And so this is 2014, and I was in the process of like trying to get off of House of Cards. And my manager, who is here tonight, Carolyn Goers, she's been hearing me say, we've been together for 12 years, and she's been hearing me have the courage to vocalize since 2009 that I believed that I was a leading man. Like, I had to, that's even hard for me to say in front of you, but believe me, like, you don't come from where I come from unless you tell yourself things like that. Like, you gotta own it, you gotta you gotta give it to yourself in that way. And if that never happened for me, it didn't happen for me. But so I'm in the storage, I'm in Brooklyn, going through the storage, and I find this postcard of my dad. And I turn to my wife, I was like, yo, look at this. And I turn it over, and it says, hey, Ma, still trying to be that lead man. And when I saw that, it just, for me, I was like, you're doing the right thing. Like, keep going. Like, keep pushing. And so
Got goosebumps from
long
that.
story short, like, I feel it's exhausting, but I feel good about it. You know, I feel good about I'm very proud of our work and what everyone accomplished on that season. I mean, we're aging and in different decades. It was like 80-hour weeks, like legitimately 116 days. I think I worked out of 120. Like every week was like 70-hour weeks, and sometimes in the 80s, like every week because of the aging makeup and all that. So, and I feel good about the story and the writing and the directing and all the acting contributions, the guest stars, the day players, like everybody, crew. I think we did something special, like everybody. I'm really excited about that season.
We are excited to see you as a leading man.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
We're gonna go to the film that is in this festival right now. We're gonna see a clip from Green Book. I love how graceful your flourish was.
Yes,
so graceful.
my pianist throat. Just for some context, my character has never had fried chicken in his life. True story. And so that was him being introduced to fried chicken.
Tell us a little bit about this movie.
Oh, wow. It's Green Book is about two gentlemen who go on a concert tour in 1962 through the segregated South. And I played Don Shirley, a concert pianist, a man who spoke 7 or 8 languages fluently, had 3 doctorates, studied in Russia and lived in London and lived on top of Carnegie Hall at the time in 1962. And there's artist lofts up there. And he needs a bouncer. He needs somebody because he's a little concerned about going on this concert tour. And so he hires kind of the toughest guy in New York City to drive him through the segregated South. And they couldn't be more different. And and so they're on this journey together in an intimate space on this tour, and they have to kind of separate at night or for dinner because of the South being segregated. And that's why the title of the film is Green Book, because there was what was called the Negro Motorist Green Book, which was a traveler's guide that informed African Americans, people of color, as to where they could sleep, dine, eat, get gas, all these, normal services. And And for a lot of black people, it was actually really freeing, this traveler's guide, because all my family is from the South, even though everyone sort of grew up, like my grandmother, even my father, they grew up in the Bay Area, but they're all really from Texas and like Kentucky. So you imagine someone passes away, you can't fly 8 people on an airplane, so they're hopping in cars traveling. They need to know where they can, sleep and how to have safe passage. So.
Well, I hope you guys all go see it. I'm about to turn it over to the audience, but before I do, we started this conversation with me dropping some bars, so to speak. So I feel like it's only fair that we end this conversation with you, just gracing us with a few,
Oh Lord.
Doesn't have to be a freestyle. I'm not gonna, do that to you, but
Dream-filled landscapes fog from London. The Bay Bridge painted in the midst among them. Time moves with slugs and the geriatric rat race causing checkbook contortions. Pregnant with ambition on a second abortion. Seeds from the swamps gotta settle for quicksand. Fighting this condition is known to cause drowning. I hold my breath in hell with every bit of life I have left. Sprouted from the marshlands and lifted off, last spotted out of no man's land. Lost in this labyrinth of nomadic masters, following footprints to greener front lawns. White picket fences is really the big business. Features of fine living excludes my niggas. Whether we got PhDs or pocketing 6 figures slanging cola out in DC. Heathens routed outside with a scenic. No wonder why my lungs stay wheezing in this fog-filled region. Ironically, I gotta get lynched to keep breathing. Stay weaving, bending corners, white knuckle in the rite of passage. Wafting off octane from the middle passage. Drift in the wake of caskets. No wonder why we wanna live, die. No wonder why we wanna die lavish. We need some Similac or something similar. Mama's breast milk was dripping cyanide. Sipping on a nipple that's been up for auction. The diamond on her finger never made it mine. We need some Similac or something similar. Mama's breast milk is dripping cyanide. Sipping on a nipple that's been up for auction. The diamond on her finger never made it mine.
Hey. All right. I'm sorry to the sound guy, but in Toronto, when something is big, we have to bang on something, Okay, so we're going to turn it over to the audience right now. There are volunteers in orange T-shirts who have mics. You have to wait for the mic. Please stand up. When you get the mic, please keep it to a question, not a comment, so we can get as many of them as possible. Thank you so much.
How you doing?
My name is Kimon Juno.
And thank you for coming out, all y'all. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kimon Juno, and I'm here with Creative Mind.
Yes.
I just graduated from Cal State East Bay, formerly known as Cal State Hayward.
Yeah,
so
brother.
I was the one clapping back here.
Yeah.
So it's good. I had to write this one down. So being a black male actor, what's your thoughts about the black man voice in the film industry? And do you feel our narrative is being limited to the narrative of sports, crime, sexuality, identity in the mainstream in the film industry? And not to say those experiences are not true, but I just want to hear your perspective.
What was the first part of your question?
Being a black male actor,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts about the black man voice in the film industry?
I always feel conflicted about that, and this is why. Like, I remember being in school, and it was 97, and then 97. Actually, it must have been 98, because the Oscars were on, but it was my first year, and it's 3 years, and I remember there was like this like lounge lobby area TV was on, and there was like some second and third year students watching the Oscars. We're there till 11 at night in classes or whatever, or getting off book. And I remember it was like Samuel Jackson popped up, and he was like presenting or something. And I remember someone said and I heard the whole thing. And someone goes, "Oh man, isn't he great? I love Samuel Jackson." And then someone was like, "Oh no, he's good, he's good." but Morgan Freeman, love Morgan Freeman. Like, really? And then they were like, yeah, but Denzel's good. It's like, yeah, Denzel. And that was the moment when I realized that, oh, you don't see me as equal. Because none of them were black. And they just slipped into this conversation of like, it wasn't, oh, I love Samuel L. Jackson, like, oh, but Robert Duvall, like, blah, blah, blah. It was a list of like, just slipped into black actors. And so in part, is obviously I'm African American and very proud to be. But also there's this thing about just really wanting to be the best actor I can, and who happens to be black, you know? Just like if you were a software engineer or whatnot, it's not, we have the best black software engineer in the country working for our company. You're just like, I'm a software engineer, like, and I'm good at it, you know, or whatever, or trying to be good at it. And so, but the fact is that we are informed by our culture and our race, and it informs our exchanges and our conversations and all of that. And in some way, it says something about how we're to be looked at in the world, and we give it a lot of value. And it should. But I would just like to see our stories that we lead, our writers, directors. I would just like all of our projects, all those participating, all those creatives to continue to push the culture forward, and for those things to continue to deepen and improve, and all of us to be stretched. And so I think we actually are living in a time where there's a reason why Sorry to Bother You exists. Get Out, Moonlight. We're in a time where these films are popping up that are not your run-of-the-mill, you know, gangster drug dealer projects or whatnot that are sort of an old model. You know, I think we're in a time when something is clearly expanding and opening up, and there are new voices. Random Acts of Flyness on HBO,
Yes.
Terrence's show, like the things that are actually Issa Rae's show. There are several contributions that people need to pay attention to, because this generation right now is the one. I think this is the Renaissance. I think this is the time in which the voices are really going to, I think the roof is going to blow off. I think it's in the process of that happening, like right now, you know? And it's hard because it happens so incrementally, or it kind of feels like it's happening slowly in real time, but I really believe it's happening. And so I just encourage you, just as an actor, like the world is always going to see you first as a black man, and that's how I relate to the world as well. But on a deeper level, I also just want to make sure that I'm relating to the world as a human being, someone who is in his own struggle to be better, and I try to like relate to these stories and connect to these people as human beings trying to live their fullest lives and to have fulfillment. And so I also want to be careful of all of our stories having such a racial component in it where it becomes the driving force of the story, because that's not my life every day. I'm black every day, but everything is not racial for me. Like sometimes I'm just going to Starbucks, I'm just getting a coffee, and that's just it. It's not about, you know, is that cop watching me or following me? And so to me, I think what's interesting is stories that not necessarily that are absent of that component, but where it's not the driving force of it, you know, because that's just not what it is all the time. And I think if we could find that balance, I think that's a worthy offering as well, not to sanitize or erase race from it, but how about just two black people in love, period? Or trying to just stay together and figure it out, a middle-class black family, you know, and one's a therapist and they're going through a divorce and trying to stay together. Like, white people do it all the time. Like, you know, and it's a good movie, that's period. But it wasn't like, you know, a white guilt story or something. It was just a story, you know, about two people dealing with like real human issues, you know. So I probably didn't answer your question, but I'm probably out of time.
Let's jump to the next one because we're running out of time.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next one.
Hi.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Becca, and I was thinking about how you were saying you didn't get a leading role until you won an Oscar. So my question is, did you see any other aspects of your career change after your win? Or did you like see yourself as an actor differently after your win or not?
I didn't see myself as any different as an actor. If anything, I was just really appreciative that the opportunities were finally in front of me. And on a larger level, I think for me and my own relationship and my own spiritual journey, I feel like I'm at where I'm supposed to be at, and that certain things may have been withheld from me, sort of from a God's eye view, because maybe I just wasn't ready, or maybe I wouldn't have handled it well, or perhaps I needed a certain type of balance in my life before those things happen, before you suddenly have access to excess, and maybe you don't have the discipline to say no or to navigate that well. And so if you end up just being unhealthy, then what is really the point, you know? And so no, I don't see myself any different necessarily as an actor. I think my responsibility is the same. I feel different. I'm a little more tired, you know. but I'm excited, and just I feel really blessed and fortunate to have had some of the experiences, and because I'm having these opportunities later in comparison to most people who are at this place, I feel like I just naturally bring a certain degree of experience because I'm used to contributing less to the story in a certain way. So I come to work off book, ready to go, and I make choices and I do it quick because I've had to do that. Like the director never had time to direct me, you know, so I had to make my own choices and direct myself. So I kind of work very independently, you know. I'm happy to be directed, but I don't necessarily lean on directors. It's not my way because I came up different, you know.
We have time for one more question. There it is.
Hi, my name is Carolyn. I'm a writer and podcaster.
Hi.
And my question for you is there a particular type of role that would make you hesitant to take it on or that you would never play? And I ask this because you've played everything from a drug dealer to a gangster to an Air Force, someone working in the Air Force in Hidden Figures, and you've covered a gamut of roles, but is there anything that would make you hesitant to accept a particular role?
Well, I would even describe those people that in that way, but in all honesty, anytime I get a script, I don't necessarily categorize a character through their occupation. You know, is there a human on that page, and is there something I can bring to it? You know, does it speak to me in a way where I can shed some light on it? Does it have something to teach me? For instance, I played a character that I wouldn't say I'm not proud of him, but it's not something that I can really watch. So I did this film. I'm a huge hip hop fan. We're gonna go over time by about a minute or two.
It's
I'm
okay.
gonna tell the story.
No one's kicking you out.
So I did this film, Roxanne, and thank you. And I took that for couple of reasons. But it wasn't because, so here's a guy who has no redeeming qualities at all. And he is with a girl, but it's based on a true story. And he's in his 30s. He's with a girl who is 16. And not only that, he is physically abusive. He's a drug dealer. He ends up becoming a drug addict. You name it. And that's not the kind of part that I would just wake up and go, I want to play this drug addict, drug dealer, pedophile guy beating a girl.
No.
Right?
No. No.
Didn't. And honestly,
It's an anti-role.
I had nightmares the last week of shooting, like legit, like every night, the last week of shooting, I couldn't sleep because I would just wake up sweating and just, because like I'm physically, like we're doing these scenes over and over again and I'm shaking her and choking her and doing all this. It was just awful. But the reason I did that was because for so many women, for them to get to a place where, whether we know them or not, but for so many women, for them to get to a place where they are relatively safe in some regards or have had success or fulfillment in their own way, a lot of them have had to step over men to get there, right? And so if Roxanne Shante, if this is really her story, and I appreciate and respect her as a person, then it was about me lending my talents to help tell her story, right? So I had to be willing to be a villain that I would never want to be in order to tell her story. So it's hard for me to say that I would never play X, Y, and Z because for me, I have to do the math on why I would even consider playing that part. And honestly, the reason I did that part was to support her story, because somebody had to tell it. Like, if it wasn't going to be me, then another actor had to have the courage to step up and play a part that has absolutely no redeeming qualities, and you're going to be the bad guy. And if you look online, I hate Mahershala Ali. Can you believe he's knocking this girl? Like, seriously, like, you know, I was like, oh, God, like, this is horrible. I was like, I'm acting. But so I always try to just, I try to look at, there's more to it than that, I think, for me. And if I'm going to be real about it, like, I think the vanity is something that it really doesn't serve you in this work. Like, not if you want to be, not if you look at, like, you know, a Daniel Day-Lewis or Michelle Williams or Viola Davis or Philip Seymour Hoffman or Viggo Mortensen, like Mark Ruffalo, like all these people that, like, I stop what I'm doing when they pop out, old Gene Hackman movies or De Niro, whatever. Like, what I loved about these films in the 70s and the 60s was, like, they were just going there and committed to it, and vanity really didn't really have its space. Like, you just had to do it, be there, go there, and that's sort of the school I come from. So, so I try to keep, there's things I do say no to, though, because it just doesn't make any sense at all to me. You know, like, it feels so gratuitous that it just is not for me. But at the beginning, I'm open until I feel there's a real reason to say no.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So that concludes our night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a reminder that Green Book is at TIFF right now. You can go see it this week. It's coming out in theaters in November. True Detective is coming very soon. You can see Mahershala. Thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.